But for us as a Black community, I think he would just be disheartened about how we have Black on Black crime, how we, our rap music, how we tear down our own moral fabric of the Black community, the flagrant use of the N-word. These are things that I think that he would be very, very upset with.
We'll discuss race and how it plays a factor and how we didn't even talk about this topic because we were afraid.
A Black executive perspective.
We are coming to you live from the new BEP studio for another thought-provoking episode of a Black Executive Perspective podcast. I'm your host, Tony Tidbit. So before we get started, we always want to remind you to make sure you check out our partners at Code M Magazine, whose mission is to save the Black family by first saving the Black man. So definitely check them out at codemmagazine.com. That is codemmagazine.com. Question I have for everyone. How does Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision for justice and equality continue to inspire change today? Well, Les Frye and I will explore this question as we commemorate Dr. King's birthday today. We're going to discuss Dr. King's enduring legacy, the profound professional impact of his teachings that he had on our lives, and consider, if he was still alive today, how he would be viewed in today's America. But before we get into that, let me welcome my sister from another mister, the legendary Les Frye.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me back. I love having discussions like this, and let's get to talking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy.
Well, absolutely. Look, today's his birthday. He was assassinated in 1968, April 4th. So it's almost been 60 years. I think the answer is 58 years since he left this earth. But his legacy still endures. So I'm very excited to talk to you about it. But before we get into it real deep, look, we have a holiday. There's a monument in Washington, D.C. There's the museum. There's a ton of stuff. But however, maybe somebody who came from Mars and don't know exactly what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Established and what he did. Let's play a quick little clip to remind everybody of his legacy.
Martin Luther King Jr. was an American Baptist minister, an activist who became the most visible voice, spokesman, and leader in the American Civil Rights Movement from 1955 until he was assassinated in 1968. Dr. King helped to advance people's rights to vote, desegregation, labor rights, and basically he fought for a multitude of basic civil rights. He was inspired by his Christian faith to pursue these avenues through nonviolent activism and civil disobedience. He led protests and marches and made speeches, many of which have gone down in history as some of the most famous speeches ever given. During Dr. King's life, he was well known. He received a Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for combating racial inequality through nonviolent resistance, and it seems as though he was a highly regarded person, but that is not quite true. Dr. King was very much disliked during his time on Earth because he threatened the way things were. He saw issues he wanted to fix, and he was vocal about them. He didn't want to stop until he left the world better than he had found it. He had a voice that held weight and importance with the people. He was feared. It wasn't until after his death where he became an icon.
So while Les, as you know, he accomplished a lot and wasn't, somebody that said, hey, I'm going to change the world. As you know of the history, he was nominated. He was put up by his church to really, combat the bus boycotting. All right. And, he didn't raise his hand, I'll do this, I'm going to go out. He had just moved there, okay? And then because he had just moved there, they nominated him because he didn't have a background where they could attack him. At least that's what they thought. And then for him taking up that mantle, and then all the things, as you just heard the narrator discuss that he did, and obviously there's a lot more. The question I have for you, what aspects of his legacy do you believe resonated the most and back then and also in today's society, today's social and political landscape?
I would say that, one of the most phenomenal things that he was able to accomplish by being such a great orator. And I believe that's why his church backed him, because he was a phenomenal orator and writer. When he's, his speeches were so compelling, and so inspiring. I think that what he managed to do is he definitely prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. When it came to public accommodations, employment, and federally funded programs, he effectively did that, outlawing the racial segregation that most of us experienced here in America during that time. And he made phenomenal steps towards marking, I would say significant steps in marking towards our equality here in this country. So in sense, you have a legal recourse now here when you are discriminated against. And I feel that that is what his foundation was all about. Today, I don't feel that we're seeing the dream that he had actually being fulfilled to where we see an elimination of that discrimination. The elimination of legal context towards people of color in this country. So I don't know if we are getting it right now.
Right. You said, one of the things, as I go back, one of the things I thought that out of all the things that he accomplished, you got to remember, back in the 50s and 60s, white people would call people the N-word right out in the face, right? They had no regard. It was second-class citizenship that was established for African-American people, okay?
Yes.
And so let's start there, okay? So without him and his work, who knows? Maybe African-Americans are still at a second-class citizen status. When it comes to all the things that the Constitution bears that we have rights about, right? Which it stated it, but it actually it was never implemented, right? With separate but equal. Okay. I think the other thing, especially when we jettison to today, and there's a ton of other things we'll dive into, but one glaring thing, he was a leader of the African American people. That vacuum has not been filled since that time frame. That's a huge thing. A person, one person that galvanized an entire race of people, okay, and had them believing, and more importantly, proud that there was somebody that was, taking up the mantle on all the issues that they dealt with. They was afraid. And let's be fair here. There was a lot of people along the way that spoke out. You had Medgar Evers. You had a bunch of people, but they ended up dead.
Malcolm
okay,
X.
or jailed, or whatever the case may be, or run off, or because the establishment, they would foreclose their homes. They would do a ton of stuff to keep them silent. Right. And so for that person to rise to that level and carry a whole race of people on his back, to me, that's his major accomplishment. And that's what's missing today. Let me hear your thoughts on that.
So I feel like, at the time, because we were facing Jim Crow laws and there was so much, there were so many atrocities that we experienced as Black people in this country during that time, that we were at a moment we were ready to be organized to fight against it. We were ready. And I feel, in my opinion, what has happened and why we don't have anybody filling that position is one, that type of the structure of the American government, the way that we were subjugated to at that time, doesn't exist any longer. However, it is resurfacing.
So hold on 1 second. So when you say it doesn't, give me specifics. Like, what are you talking about?
All right. So we had, of course, segregation. And
Right.
we couldn't go to the same bathroom. We couldn't drink from the same water fountain.
Oh, I
We
got it.
couldn't
That
sit.
level
All of
of
these at that
government.
level
Got it.
of
Got it.
government,
Got it.
that
Got it.
level of sanctioned,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Apartheid.
ideology. Yes,
Right. Right.
here
Right.
in the United States, was so severe that that we had to fight against it. We were dying at a high rate. We were being policed and murdered, hung. I mean, if people look up at the word what picnic means, you'll understand what that is. That people could legally go and have a lunch, sit down with a blanket and watch
And watch a
somebody get
lynching.
hung. Yes,
Right. Right. Right.
exactly. These are the kind of things that were going on in this country, and we had had enough. When Rosa Parks sat on that bus, that was it. We were done. We were a main contributor to the success of this country, the wealth of this country, and you were treating us like this, but yet and still, you were championing this idea of bringing all your poor, your masses, your people over here. And yet the one people that you brought over here, you were not treating them the same as any other immigrant that came over here. You were treating them less than. So we haven't gotten to the point where we need to have that kind of a ralliance of people getting together and fighting for our rights.
Right.
You
Right.
know, now the only other person that managed to do that to some extent was Louis Farrakhan when we had the Million Man March.
Right.
And
Right.
and I've not seen anything since then that was similar to that.
So are you saying, so what I'm hearing is that because we had this situation that was all encompassing, that Black people were galvanized together regardless, because segregation affected every aspect of our life.
Exactly.
Okay. And now we don't have that. Okay. Now there is, and obviously things have changed. They've evolved. Okay. But so what you're saying is because we don't have that big boulder that's overt, and that's probably
Right.
the better word, overt, right? That is in our face, and our kids can't go to proper schools, and you can't get a job, and you're talking second class citizenship. That was the reason why that leader was very important and prominent at that time. But
Yeah.
now, because we don't have that, we got the Kardashians. We have a bunch of, we got, and I'm not picking on them, but I'm just saying we're now those people who sacrifice, we're living off their backs, off their deaths, off their fear. And we've now been able to prosper. Right. So we don't look at, is that what I'm hearing basically? Why?
But have we though? But have
Well,
we,
but see, this
Tony?
is why, because here's the thing though. I think every other group still has a leader or several leaders, regardless if they're prospering in certain areas or not. Right. So that's the void, in my opinion, that's missing.
It's time to rethink your protein. AgileLab's protein bars are crafted with high-quality protein, double the leucine, and enriched branched-chain amino acids, essential for optimal muscle recovery. Finally, a protein bar that works as hard as you do. So visit agilelabs.com and use the code BEP to get 20% off. That's agilelabs.com, promo code BEP.
Okay, so let's look at that. Because if there is a leader of a nation, let's say particularly there is a voice of a particular nation, and I don't see that too much here in the United States. I might see it in a worldwide view of that. We have like a Netanyahu for the people in Israel and stuff like that. We don't have that any longer because our government made sure we would no longer have that. If you look at the assassination rate of political figures who rallied people to fight for rights or to fight for just in atrocities, anything that occurred here, they were murdered or they were jailed. Let's look at Leonard Peltier right now. Leonard Peltier was supposedly convicted of a crime of the death of FBI agents. And this is a man who was the head of the American Indian movement. This man is rotting in jail today because they don't want him to come out and they don't want people to rally. So they're going to let him die in there, even though there has been no clear proof or evidence that he murdered those agents.
Right.
Believe you me, we're going to have that thumb on us forever. So if anybody comes out of the woodwork and says, hey, we're going to put our people together and stuff, they are highly watched by the FBI.
Right.
They disappear, or there's a smear campaign against them.
Yeah.
Look at what happened when Obama was a president.
No. And I get that.
Yeah, I mean, there were things that were enacted that we haven't seen ever in our politics.
Here's the thing, no less. I get it. I get all that, right? But Obama still became president, right? And at the end of the day, let's just be fair. I want to be fair here, right? Because it's Martin Luther King's birthday, right? So at the end of the day, there was still people that rose up to become leaders, right? We don't have, yes, are they being watched? And they could be this. I'm not saying that's not true. But that vacuum has not, that void has not been filled, okay? And for various of reasons. But right now, it's like every man for himself. And to be fair, there are leaders in other ethnic groups, okay, that, and I'm not saying they never rise to the prominence of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That's not my point. My point is, that's one of the things when we talk about his legacy that's missing today, right? Now, the other thing, though, in terms of his teachings, I mean, because he taught about, about nonviolence. He talked about the character of a person's, how a person should be viewed by the character of them, not based on the color of their skin. He fought not just for African-American people, but for all people, all right? All people of color, okay? He even spoke out, which, to be honest, going back to your FBI stuff, is one of the things in terms of him being definitely, and he was definitely marked, but when he spoke out about the Vietnam War, that really made them accelerate their vitriol against him, okay? I'm talking the FBI and stuff to that nature, right? But all that being said, right, what ways do you think his teachings continue to serve as a blueprint for leadership and activism in our communities?
So I feel like we've gained some grounds as far as having equitable space here in the United States, as far as being able to own property, being able to integrate businesses, government seats, these kind of things. But what I feel is that we kind of gave up the ghost in a sense. I mean, even though we fought for those things, and it was such a hard fight, we needed to continue that fight. We needed to continue that activism, because if you look at how society is today, we are still suffering to some extent the same things that we suffered in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and Jim Crow laws and stuff like that.
So yeah, and I definitely hear you. So let me answer the question, because I have a thought. So one of the things is, when we talk about the blueprint for leadership and activism, all right, we kind of spoke about it a little bit, right? Is that, Dr. King was nominated to fight back or lead the church against the boycott, the bus boycotting, all right? And then from there, as he led, he didn't take a class in terms of how to combat this. He didn't say, hey, I'm not smart enough to do this. Or, you know what, pick somebody else, because I don't want my family's going to be attacked and I don't want that type of weight. Okay? So from a leadership standpoint, we talk about a blueprint from a leadership. He rose to the occasion. Okay? And that's something that anybody, if you was looking at a blueprint of what he did from a leadership standpoint, and then more importantly, the activism that he did in the community, those are the things that people can still do today. Okay? He rallied his people together. He was consistent in the message. He was out there talking specifically and continuously about what was going on and the injustices. And then more importantly, when they were able a year later to segregate the buses, He could have easily just said, my work is done and stopped, right? But he continued to push that envelope on all the other things. So why don't you share a personal story about, how his words or his actions affected you?
So, I came from a family that was very, I would say that we were a middle class family, and we were very involved in the civil rights movement at that time. I think most middle class people who came from the South, who lived in segregated areas, were supportive of that. My parents always instilled in me that I can do whatever I wanted to do. And so we were individuals who broke barriers. My mother was the first Black cheerleader of her school, high school team, and she remembers people boycotting the team because they were integrated. These are the kind of things that my parents instilled in me, because these are the things that Martin Luther King fought for.
Mhm.
So through my whole entire life, it has given me a spirit of activism and being able to point out when there's some inequities, some inequalities when I'm in society. And I've suffered many. I was a child of the 60s, raised in the 70s, and that was still going on when I was being raised. One of the best things that my mother could have done for us is to move us to an all-white community that was not fully integrated whatsoever. And we took advantages of all-white schools. And even though my sister and I suffered because of that, in a sense, we were profiled, we were abused by, people with a white supremacist attitude. It might be just me or my sister at the school or somebody else. We learned how to navigate through that world and how to be able to accomplish and succeed despite that. So I feel like that's how it influenced me. My mother always used to say I could be whatever I want to be and do whatever I wanted to do. And nothing ever kept me from that. I was fearless. So if he did anything, he instilled that in my family, and he instilled that in us as a people genetically.
One of the things, I grew up in a single parent household. So I didn't know my father or anything like that. So there was an absence of having a male in the household. And, so my heroes, male heroes, my mother was my hero, but from a male figure standpoint, I had, it was two individuals. It was Muhammad Ali,
Mhm.
and it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I take that back. And the third one, well, I had three. It was Sidney Poitier. Okay. Those were my three heroes. And Dr. Martin Luther King, I would read everything I could. And the reason he was my hero is because I used to watch. Number one, I read everything. And I was astonished at what he was able to accomplish. When he was going through the civil rights era, I was 4 years old. I mean, I was born in 1964.
Mhm.
So when he passed away in 1968, I was only 4 years old. Okay.
Right.
So obviously I learned a lot from reading and watching shows and biographies and stuff to that nature. But the reason he was my hero is because of the things that he dealt with that I don't know if I could have did that. And so I don't know. Matter of fact, I don't think most people could deal with that. They say they could, but they couldn't. Okay. And again, he didn't volunteer for that. Number two, when I was in when I was in third grade, we had a play, and I was Martin Luther King. I played Martin Luther King in that. And, so I had a sense of pride about Martin Luther King Jr. Never met him, but the way that he fought for our people, and succeeded, but also the negativity and all the turmoil that he had to deal with his family and all those things. And then them not growing up with a father after he was assassinated. So, those are the things, I'll never forget that. And then, when we talk about the nonviolence, right? I didn't understand nonviolence when I was a kid. You had you talked about earlier, you had, it was Malcolm X at the time, who was talking, and he was, and this is the thing, everybody talk about Malcolm X was always talking about violence. He ain't never hit nobody, okay? But what he was saying was you have the right to defend yourself, and that's just common sense. Where Martin Luther King, people were getting beat up, and he was like, don't fight back because you're giving them ammunition, okay, to say, oh, I got to defend myself, or they're a beast, and this is why we're doing, and all those things, right? But for him to deal with that from a nonviolent standpoint, which, to be fair, I believe, if I remember correctly, he I don't say emulated Gandhi when they were going through what they were going through in the UK, in India, and the UK, and stuff of that nature. So, and then talking about love, about loving one another, and here's the thing, a lot of people don't recognize. There was a lot of white people that was involved in this movement, okay, that were helping. There were people of all faith. You had Jewish people. You had all different type of people helping in this movement. That's why they attacked him, okay? Because at the end of the day, if it was just black people, okay, they're only going to go so far. But you having an effect where you're bringing all races together, okay? And then he had a seat at the table with Lyndon Johnson, at the president. So those things inspired me as when I was a little kid, because to your point earlier, there was no other black heroes. Mm-hmm. There was nothing you could look at and be proud of, okay? And so for me, that was very important. And I think for the most part, and we can, and your all the stuff you were talking about earlier about where we are today as a society and the things that we still don't deal with, we still don't have, and how they still got their foot on our neck and they're still pushing back in the whole 9 yards. The one thing that will last forever, and the one dream, his dream, that we still have, and that, to your point, one of the reasons why we started this was to bring people together based on love, by education, right? By, bringing things to the forefront that they may not be aware of. But that love about seeing another person as your brother, as your sister, not what they look like on the outside, is something that I feel, and obviously I'm an optimist. And, maybe I'm naive, but I believe that the majority of people do have it. I think what I believe is that there's a minority of people who got the biggest of mouths, who basically go across and trying to keep things the same way. And we could get into all that. So, but let's do this. Go ahead. Let me hear your thoughts.
I just want to say something. I mean, you equated to Martin Luther King to Gandhi. And I think that here with Gandhi, maybe his methods, his sit-out methods, his imprisonment methods were Gandhian. But remember, he was a pastor and he was a Christian, and his methods were Christian. His methods were the methods of Jesus Christ. I mean, if you think about the principle of Jesus Christ, as it says in Matthew 5:14-16, you can't drive out evil with darkness, or darkness to evil and light to goodness. Then light drives out evil and love drives out hate. So he was going through that principle of, you don't fight fire with fire, you fight fire with something opposite of that. So you don't fight hate with hate, you fight love with hate. Those are what he was using. Those principles were the things, or the foundation of his rhetoric, because he was a pastor. But those Absolutely. Are all biblical principles.
There's no question. Yeah. There's no question. I was talking more from the nonviolent standpoint. So let's find out, what would, if Dr. King was alive, what would he think of today?
If Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was alive today, looking back on the last 50-odd years, he would see both immense progress, but he would also see regression. Part of this is the natural ebb and flow of things, and part of this is just because some things haven't exactly changed since 1968. He certainly would have taken note of the 8-year presidency of the first black president of the United States. Of course, I am talking about former President Barack Obama. I think he would have been excited about the former president's efforts to reform health care.
So what's your thoughts? If he was alive today, And as our narrator stated, obviously they made some progress, but, in terms of his dream, we still haven't gotten there.
Jeez, I think he would be very disheartened. I think that the things that he's seeing. I mean, yes, he would be happy that we've integrated, that we've managed to, he's seeing, uh, Black people in government, Black people owning business and owning property and stuff like that. But we still have policing oversight, brutality, um, how Blacks are treated via law enforcement. Our incarceration rates are high. The sentencings of Black people as per white people or people of color in this country are different than those that who've committed offenses that are not of color. But for us as a Black community, I think he would just be disheartened about how we have Black on Black crime, how we, our rap music, how we tear down our own moral fabric of the Black community, the flagrant use of the N-word. These are things that I think that he would be very, very upset with. I'm reminded of an episode of, I can't think of this cartoon, but they did an episode where if Martin Luther King came back, what would he not like? And I think it was the Boondocks. And he basically said these same things. What is this that I'm seeing with us as a people? If we can't stay together, if we can't unite, if we're killing one another, or we're calling each other the N-word, the thing that was given to us by a racist society, then who are we as a people now? What have we become?
If you like what you hear and want to join us on this journey of making uncomfortable conversations comfortable, please subscribe to a Black Executive Perspective podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe now to stay connected for more episodes that challenge, inspire, and lead the change.
Right. You make a good point in a lot of that. I think the other thing, though, too, again, the fight, the struggle, the how we went, to market, to say, was through the Black church.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was all through the church, and we don't see that today, right? In terms of filling that void, African American people, for the most part, and I think most Americans, unfortunately, don't go to church like they did 50, 60 years ago. So let's go to the next clip.
I think if Dr. King was alive today, he would look at civil rights organizations and movements like Black Lives Matter with a positive and proud eye, but I also think he would encourage us all to bridge the gap that so clearly sits between us still. We live in a world right now that is quite focused on identity politics. It can sometimes feel like we haven't come that far, or like things haven't changed from the 1960s. Although there is always still more work for us to do, Dr. King helped propel us forward, and we just have to keep his words in mind.
Yeah, so going back to what we talked about earlier, there are certain organizations, Black Lives Matter, to be fair, and there's several others that have risen up and really have pushed the envelope. All right, now, they haven't pushed it like 1962, but they have risen up over the George Floyd murder and other things. All right, let's go to the last thing.
His incredibly famous and historic "I Have a Dream" speech, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said the words, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Those initial lines really resonate with me personally. As a biracial woman, it is clear to me that there was once a day and time where people like me were basically illegal. In many places, interracial marriage was illegal until 1964. That is during the work of Dr. King. Without his voice and the voice of others like him, this world might be a very, very different one, and I am eternally grateful for his voice, his wisdom, and his bravery.
Yeah, so, obviously interracial marriage, there was maybe 1%, 2%, 3% of interracial relationships back in the late 1960s. Now, or 2%, 3% of the country approved of that. Now 97% approved of that. So, but obviously, none of that probably would be at the forefront or would be at the level of acceptance if it wasn't for Dr. Martin Luther King. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that he initiated the movement, but it wasn't until the Loving case that became.
There's no question. But it's
Yeah,
still a
we wouldn't have
part
been
of the
able
whole
to.
thing, right? It's still
Yeah,
part of the whole thing.
Interracial relationships is something that we've always had, especially people that are from the South. We're all integrated in some form or fashion. It was just white marrying black at that time. Anything else, you could go ahead and marry all you wanted to your heart's desire. But it was a white man marrying a black woman, that the loving case that proved that we could have those kind of relationships. But if it wasn't for us fighting for that, um, that love would lead the way in any situation. We would, if it wasn't for the civil rights movement, we wouldn't have the loving case. We wouldn't have the LGBTQ movement. We wouldn't have any of those things.
Correct, correct, correct. Well, listen, my girl, this is a lot. I mean, number one, I'm glad I'm here to be able to have this conversation. Give me final thoughts.
So I think my final thoughts about this right now is that I don't want Martin Luther King's dream speech to be a dream deferred. There are still some things that he had that were not completely accomplished through that speech. A real promise of democracy, true racial justice, a solid brotherhood, a nation that doesn't go back to business as usual, people of color still living in ghettos and poverty, not having an equal playing field when it comes to our financial differences, just righteousness and justice for everybody, and all men created equal. These are some of the aspects that he had in that speech. I think we need to continue to fight for that. I still feel to some certain extent that we are based on our color and not the content of our character. It may be different, but it isn't, because we wouldn't have some of the things that are occurring in our nation happening today if that was something that was fully visualized by Martin Luther King, and fully visualized by the people of color who fought during the civil rights movement, or us as a nation as a whole. That we never changed the perspective of our nation. We just got an advantage. And I think that when I say we don't want this to be a dream deferred, we need to change how this country thinks about color, about race, about socioeconomic status. We need to change that, and we need to fight that everybody has a level, equal playing field in this country, and an advantage that anybody has as rights to this country and living in this country as an individual.
Well, look, thank you. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts on this, on his birthday. It really means a lot. So I want you to stay right there, because we're definitely going to dive in. I'm going to have you help us with our call to action. So I think it's now time for
Tony's Tidbit.
So the tidbit today is: legacy lives not in words, but in actions. And true progress begins when we look inward, reflect deeply, and commit ourselves to being the change Dr. King dreamed of. How we honor him today shapes the future of justice and equality for generations to come. So, we want to definitely thank Dr. King. Obviously, we have a lot of work to continue that needs to be done. So his dream is filled, I should say. But again, I want to thank Les Frye for coming on and speaking today on his birthday. So, and I also want to remind you to don't forget to check out this week's Need to Know by Dr. Nasinga Burton. Comes on a Black Executive Perspective podcast, dives into the timely and crucial topics that shapes our community and world, keeps you up to date on what's going on, stuff that you need to know. So definitely don't forget to check that out every Thursday here on a Black Executive Perspective podcast, Need to Know by Dr. Nasinga Burton. Now, obviously, we're not trying to be the civil rights movement or Dr. King. We couldn't even sit in their boots, right? But at the same time, our goal here is to decrease all forms of discrimination. And we have a call to action. It's called LESS, LESS. And we're looking for all of you to jump in this, because this is something that you have control over. We don't have to go to our congressman. You don't have to write a letter to the mayor. This is something that every human being can do. And if every human being does this, these four letters, these four words, you would be amazed of the things that will change. So Les Frye, the legendary Les Frye, is going to help us walk through Les, kick us off.
So the L is for learn. Educate yourself on racial and cultural nuances. When you educate yourself, you're going to find the beauty in our differences and the commonality that lies between us all.
Absolutely. And then the E stands for empathy. Once you've learned, now you should be more empathetic about your friends and your colleagues of what they've been going through. Being now you can put yourself in their shoes and have a better understanding.
The S is for share. Share your insights to enlighten others. So once you've learned something, teach another person. Talk to them and gain another perspective, or give them another perspective. And when we learn and educate ourselves, then we shouldn't have any problems when we're learning and having an open mind towards each other's perspectives.
Absolutely. And the final S stands for stop. We want each individual, every individual, to actively stop discrimination as it walks in your path. And it's as simple as, if Uncle Joe is over at the Thanksgiving table, on Sunday dinner, and Uncle Joe says something that's inappropriate, all you have to do is say, Uncle Joe, we don't believe that, we don't say that, and you stop it right there. So if everyone can incorporate less, LESS, we'll build a more fair, more understanding world. And here's the kicker. We'll all see the change that we want to see, because less will become more. So we're so glad that you were able to join this episode on Dr. Martin Luther King. We ask that you continue to follow A Black Executive Perspective and listen and watch all our episodes on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow us on all of our socials of LinkedIn, X, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram at A Black Exec. For our fabulous guest, the legendary Les Frye, we thank her for being here. I'm Tony Tidbit. We talked about it. We love you. And guess what? We're out.
A Black Executive Perspective.